Good morning. When I first received the inspiration for the series, Seeking the New Poetry, it was Sri Aurobindo's magnificent work, The Future Poetry, that gave me the inspiration. Reading through it, I selected all those poets he had praised, some who he praised very highly. And then I went to their works and selected poetry from many, many books. So we begin today with Sri Aurobindo on Tagore from the Future Poetry. These are selections of Sri Aurobindo's writing from various parts of the Future Poetry, where each time he mentioned one of the poets. Today, Tagore. So we begin with his words. A greater era of man's living seems to be in promise. Whatever nearer and earthier powers may be striving to lead him on a side path away to a less exalted ideal. And with that advent, there must come a new great age of his creation, different from the past epochs, which he counts as his glories, and superior to them in its vision and motive. But first there must intervene a poetry which will lead him towards it from the present faint beginnings. It will be aided by new views in philosophy, a changed and extended spirit in science, and new revelations in the other arts, in music, painting, architecture, sculpture, as well as high new ideals in life, and new powers of a reviving, but no longer limited or obscurantist religious mind. A glint of this change is already visible, and in poetry there is already the commencement of such a greater leading, the conscious effort of Whitman, the tone of Carpenter, the significance of the poetry of A.E., the rapid, immediate fame of Tagore are its first signs. The idea of the poet, who is also the rishi, has made again its appearance. The poetry of Tagore is already a new striking instance of what, differently seen and followed out, might have been a specifically philosophic and religious truth, but here turned into beauty and given a new significance by the transforming power of poetic vision. Today, much of the poetry of Tagore is the sign of such a sadhana, a long instance of assured spiritual discovery and experience. But what is given, whether directly or in symbol or in poetic image, is not the formal steps of the sadhana, but the strongly felt movement and the living outcome, the vision and life and inner experience, the spirit and power and body of a sweetness and beauty and delight. Tagore is what some of the French writers of vers libre are, and Whitman and Carpenter are not. A delicate and subtle craftsman, and he has done his work with a perfect grace and spiritual fineness. But there is no attempt to do anything more than just the work in hand. No intention of displacing the old way of poetry, in which he has done in his own language such wonderful things, by a new principle of poetic movement. This aim we may perhaps best express if we take up and modify a phrase of Meredith's, when he speaks of the hampered human voice that could never say, quote, "our inmost in the sweetest way," hampered by the austerity of its wisdom or the excess of its sense and passion. But if it is rarely that this sweetest way is found, yet do we not get near to it sometimes in Yeats and Tagore? At least this new turn of the poetic voice is characteristically an endeavor to see and to say our inmost in the inmost way. A first opening out to this new way of seeing is the sense of the work of Whitman and Carpenter, and some of the recent French poets, of Tagore and Yeats and A.E., of Meredith and some others of the English poets. The poets of yesterday and today, Whitman, Carpenter, the Irish poets, Tagore, but also others in their degree, are forerunners of this new spirit and way of seeing, prophets sometimes, but at others only illumined by occasional hints or by side rays of a light which has not flooded all their vision. Precisely, there lies the greatest power of poetic rhythm for the very highest work that the New Age has to do, and that it can be done by a new use of the poetic method without breaking the whole form of poetry. Tagore's own lyrical work in his mother tongue is the best evidence. Tagore has recently attempted a kind of free verse in Bengali, not so good as his regular meters, though melodious enough, as everything must be that is written by this master musician of the word. And throughout there is the same choric or dithyrambic principle of movement. This then seems to be the natural high water mark of free poetical rhythm. It is a use of the poetic principle of measure in its essence, without the limitations of a set form. Evidently, much can be done in this rhythmical method. But it is yet doubtful whether in languages which lack the support of quantitative measure. Poetical expression in this form can carry home with at all the same force as in the received ways of word music. The poetry of Tagore owes its sudden and universal success to this advantage, that he gives us more of this discovery and fusion for which the mind of our age is in quest than any other creative writer of the time. His work is a constant music of the overpassing of the borders, a chant-filled realm in which the subtle sounds and lights of the truth of the Spirit give new meanings to the finer subtleties of life. The objection has been made that this poetry is too subtle, too remote, goes too far away from the broad, near, present, and vital actualities of terrestrial existence. Yeats is considered by some a poet of Celtic romance and nothing more. Tagore, accused in his own country of an unsubstantial poetic philosophizing, a lack of actuality, of reality of touch and force, of vital insistence. But this is to mistake the work of this poetry, and to mistake too, in a great measure, the sense of life as it must reveal itself to the greatening mind of humanity, now that that mind is growing in world knowledge and towards self-knowledge. These poets have not indeed done all that has to be done, or given the complete poetic synthesis and fusion. Their work has been to create a new and deeper manner of seeing life, to build bridges of visioned light and rhythm between the infinite and eternal and the limited mind and soul and embodied life of man. The future poetry has not to stay in their achievement. It has yet to step from these first fields into new and yet greater ranges, to fathom all the depths yet unplumbed, to complete what has been left half done or not yet done, to bring all it can of the power of man's greater self and the universal spirit into a broader and even the broadest possible all of life. That cannot and will not be achieved in its fullness at once, but to make a foundation of this new infinite range of poetic vision and creation is work enough to give greatness to a whole age. The Irish poets, and in a different way the few Indians, Tagore and Chattopadhyay and Mrs. Naidu, who have written in English or transferred their poetical thought into that medium, aim at pure intuitivities of a more psychic feeling, sensation, and life vision, or a subtle and psychic or spiritualized imagination and intelligence. All, however, are secretly moved to their very different and often contradictory tendencies by the same fundamental endeavor of the time spirit. The difficulty has been to find the intuitive language which will be the true medium and the condition of perfect success of this endeavor. The poetry of Whitman and his successors has been that of life, but of life broadened, raised, and illumined by a strong intellectual intuition of the self of man and the large soul of humanity. And at the subtlest elevation of all that has yet been reached stands, or rather wings and floats, in a high intermediate region, the poetry of Tagore. Not in the complete spiritual light, but amid an air shot with its seekings and glimpses, a sight and cadence found in a psycho-spiritual heaven of subtle and delicate soul experience, transmuting the earth tones by the touch of its radiance. The wide success and appeal of his poetry is indeed one of the most significant signs of the tendency of the mind of the age. At the same time, one feels that none of these things are at all the whole of what we are seeking, or the definite outcome and issue. That can only be assured when a supreme light of the Spirit, a perfect joy and satisfaction of the subtlety and complexity of a finer psychic experience, and a wide strength and amplitude of the life soul, sure of the earth and open to the heavens, have met, found each other, and fused together in the sovereign unity of some great poetic discovery and utterance. The note, which has already begun and found many of its tones in Whitman and Carpenter and A.E. and Tagore, will grow into a more full and near and intimate poetic knowledge and vision and feeling, which will continue to embrace more and more, no longer only the more exceptional inner states and touches, which are the domain of mystic poetry, but everything in our inner and outer existence, until all life and experience has been brought within the mold of the spiritual sense and the spiritual interpretation. A poetry of this kind will be, in a supreme way, what all art should be, a thing of harmony and joy and illumination, a solution and release of the soul from its vital unrest and questioning and struggle, not by any ignoring of these things, but by an uplifting into the strength of the self within and the light and air of its greater view, where there is found not only the point of escape, but the supporting calmness and power of a seated knowledge, mastery, and deliverance. In the greatest art and poetry, there should be something of the calm of the impersonal, basing and elevating the effort and struggle of the personality, something of the largeness of the universal, releasing and harmonizing the troubled concentrations of the individual existence, something of the sense of the transcendent, raising the inferior, ignorant, and uncertain powers of life towards a greater strength and light and ananda. And when art and poetry can utter the fullest sense of these things, it is then that they will become the greatest fortifiers and builders of the soul of man, and assure it in the grandeur of its own largest self and spirit.